Buckle up, everybody. We're about to take a deep dive into some serious theological controversy.
That's right. We're going back to the 4th century, into the heart of the Arian controversy.
And to guide us through this battle of beliefs, we've got the writings of one fiery bishop, Phoebadius of Agen. His book against the Arians is, well, let's just say he doesn't mince words.
He definitely doesn't. I mean, just from the title alone, you can tell he's not here to make friends. This was a time when people were truly passionate about these theological debates.
It's wild to think about people back then debating the nature of God with the same kind of intensity we see in, like, comment sections today.
Oh, absolutely. And to really understand Phoebadius' take on it all, we need to understand the ideas he was battling.
So give us the crash course. Who were the Arians and what did they believe?
Okay, so picture this. It's the 4th century, and this priest named Arius starts preaching some pretty radical ideas about Jesus. Basically, he was saying that Jesus wasn't fully divine in the same way God the Father is.
So Jesus was like a lesser being in their view.
Right. Arius believed Jesus was created by God the Father and therefore subordinate to him. And this idea, it just exploded. It caused a huge rift in the early church.
I bet. This wasn't just some abstract theological debate. It was about the very essence of who Jesus was. No wonder people were fired up.
Exactly. And that's where Phoebadius comes in with his book against the Arians, ready to take down what he saw as a dangerous heresy.
And how does he go about that? From the excerpts I've seen, he's not afraid to use some, well, colorful language.
Let's just say subtlety wasn't really his style.
I mean, he calls their arguments, and I quote, the devil's cunning deceit, and compares Arian teachings to poison coated with honey. This guy did not come to play.
He knew how to grab your attention, that's for sure. But it also goes to show you just how high the stakes were in his mind. This wasn't just an intellectual disagreement for Phoebadius.
He was about protecting people from what he saw as spiritual danger.
Right, exactly. He genuinely believed that believing the wrong thing about Jesus could have eternal consequences for your soul.
Okay, I could see why he was so fired up. But honestly, don't we all kind of relate to that feeling when you hear an argument and think, wait, hold on, something's not right here?
All the time. But Phoebadius, he takes it to a whole new level. He meticulously picks apart the Arians' arguments, dissecting their language with a fine-toothed comb. And in chapter 3, he zeroes in on a phrase that, on the surface, seems pretty uncontroversial. He talks about how both sides claim to believe in one God.
Which makes sense. That's a pretty fundamental belief in Christianity. So where's the disagreement?
Well, it's all about how you interpret that phrase, right? The Arians used it to support their view of Jesus as this lesser created being.
So same words, totally different meanings.
Exactly.
It's like those arguments you get into where you realize, wait, we're using the same word, but we're not even talking about the same thing.
100%. And Phoebadius was really sharp in picking up on that. He realized that sometimes the most dangerous ideas are the ones that sound simple on the surface because they can easily mislead people.
It's like a wolf in sheep's clothing.
Yes. And he's trying to show people how to spot the wolf. It's like that saying, right? The devil's in the details. And Phoebadius was a master of unpacking those details.
He was like a theological detective sniffing out sneaky arguments. And he doesn't just stop at dissecting phrases. In the next few chapters, he takes on a whole word that might sound a bit, well, jargony.
Oh, yeah. Get ready for substance.
Substance, it doesn't exactly roll off the tongue, does it? So what's the big deal with this word? Why is Phoebadius so hung up on it?
Well, in the 4th century, substance wasn't just some abstract philosophical term. It was a theological powder keg. See, when you're talking about God and Jesus, substance gets at the core of their being. Are they fundamentally the same kind of being or not?
So when Phoebadius says Jesus and God the Father share the same substance,
he's making a huge statement about Jesus' divinity. He's saying Jesus isn't just some created being. He's saying Jesus is God in the same way God the Father is God.
And how are the Arians reacting to this whole substance argument?
Not well. They hated it, which is understandable, right? Because if Jesus shares the same substance as God, their whole idea of Jesus as this subordinate being, it just crumbles.
So Phoebadius lays down this potentially complicated word, substance, and how does he explain it? Because you and I might have a theology degree between us, but I'm guessing most people back then, when they heard substance, they were like, huh.
And you know what? He doesn't dive into some dense philosophical treatise. Instead, Phoebadius gets strategic. He starts pulling out examples from, wait for it, the Bible.
Now that's just good debating. Use your opponent's own playbook against them. What kind of examples is he using?
So in chapters 7 and 8, he points to how the word substance pops up in all sorts of contexts throughout the scriptures. For example, he talks about how in the book of Tobit, it's used to talk about a person's wealth. Like when it says, give alms from your substance.
Interesting. So he's grounding this complex theological concept in something people can relate to money.
Exactly. And he doesn't stop there. He brings up how the Psalms talk about King David's substance, referring to his human body and soul. So Phoebadius is basically saying, look, this word is already right here, woven into the fabric of our sacred texts.
He's really driving home that point, that substance is not some made-up ivory tower jargon. It's part of their everyday language and their sacred scriptures.
Exactly. And it's a brilliant strategy because it neutralizes the Arian objection to the word. They can't just dismiss it as some irrelevant theological mumbo-jumbo. Phoebadius has cleverly turned their own scriptures against them.
That's such a power move. And you know what? It's a good reminder for us today, too, right? Sometimes the most effective way to explain complex ideas is to find those relatable, everyday examples, to use language that resonates with people's lived experiences.
Absolutely. Don't hit them with jargon, hit them with something they can connect to. And Phoebadius, he was a master at that.
It's like we've been going head-to-head in a theological boxing match.
Yeah.
This Phoebadius guy, he knows how to throw a punch, but he doesn't just stick to these abstract arguments about the nature of God. He actually dives into some really tricky, concrete issues.
Oh, yeah. He doesn't shy away from the tough stuff.
Like, in the later chapters, he tackles the mystery of Jesus' birth, and that's a whole other ball game, right?
You're telling me, how do you even begin to explain something as mind-blowing as the incarnation? It's like trying to fit the ocean into a teacup.
Right. And it's one thing to argue about Jesus' divine substance, but trying to explain how God literally became human, that's some next-level stuff. So how does Phoebadius even approach it?
Well, he actually walks this really fine line between, like, asserting what we can know from the scriptures and acknowledging that some things are just going to remain a mystery.
So he's not claiming to have all the answers.
He's definitely not giving us a play-by-play of the Immaculate Conception, but he's also not throwing his hands up and saying, it's a miracle, end of story.
Okay, so which is it? Give me an example.
All right, so in chapters 9 and 10, he really emphasizes this idea that Scripture clearly states that Jesus is from God. He hammers that point home, especially when arguing against the Arians who are saying that Jesus was created.
Makes sense. He's using the scriptures as his foundation, as any good bishop would.
Right, but then he adds this other layer. He's basically like, look, I can't tell you exactly how God pulled this off. The actual mechanics of Jesus' birth, how the divine became flesh, that's something he's willing to leave as, well, a holy mystery.
That's kind of refreshing, honestly. I mean, he's acknowledging the limits of what we can understand. He's not afraid to say, we don't know everything.
Exactly. Which is a pretty powerful message even today, don't you think? In a world where everyone's expected to have all the answers, it's nice to be reminded that it's okay to acknowledge the mystery, the things that might always be a little bit beyond our grasp.
Totally. It's like, it's okay to say, wow, and just appreciate the wonder of it all.
Exactly. And that's part of what makes exploring these old texts so fascinating, isn't it? These were real people grappling with huge questions, and they weren't afraid to admit when something was just, well, mysterious.
For sure. So as we wrap up our deep dive into Phoebadius and his book against the Arians, what's the one thing you really hope listeners will take away from this whole conversation?
For me, it really boils down to this. Language is powerful. It's a tool that can be used to argue, to persuade, but also to inspire, and even to evoke a sense of awe.
Like Phoebadius showed us, sometimes just one word, like substance, can spark a whole theological war.
Right. Words have weight. They shape our understanding of the world.
They can even shape the destiny of your eternal soul if you're in the 4th century. But even if we're not facing eternal damnation for misinterpreting a word or two, I think there's still a really important lesson here for all of us.
Absolutely.
Whether we're reading a news article, scrolling through social media, or even just having a conversation with a friend, it's worth paying attention to the words being used, to dig a little deeper, ask some questions.
Because who knows? You might just uncover a whole world of meaning that was hidden just beneath the surface.
And that's what this deep dive is all about, right? It's about diving into these ancient texts, these historical debates, and finding those nuggets of wisdom that are still relevant today.
100%. Because the more we understand the past, the better equipped we are to navigate the present.
And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive. A huge thank you to everyone for joining us on this journey through the Arian controversy. We'll see you next time for another deep dive into the world of ancient texts and timeless ideas.